Hello, this is Sue Lloyd, Vice Chair of the ISSB, and I'm joined today by our Chair, Emmanuel Faber, recording this podcast following our April board meeting here in sunny Frankfurt. So today we finalised our plans for our consultation on our future standard setting priorities and our consultation on the methodology to make targeted updates to the international applicability of our SASB standards. And earlier this month, we also had a supplementary board meeting where we decided to complement our package of reliefs to enable companies to focus their initial ISSB reporting on climate disclosures only. But before we get into all of that, Emmanuel, perhaps you could start by sharing with listeners an update on some of the things that have been keeping you busy since our last podcast.
Thank you, Sue. With pleasure. Welcome, everyone. So, our very clear priority these days is about ensuring that we land our S1 and S2 standards properly ready and supported for market and jurisdiction adoption in the coming months. So I could highlight in particular very positive meetings with key stakeholders. For instance, recently with the Washington spring meetings of the World Bank and the IMF that demonstrated a broad support to what we do and the urgency to deliver this global baseline, in particular on climate, but also starting to engage very, very concretely with parties, including multilateral banks and institutions on capacity building. We are currently finalizing S1 and S2, going through the balloting process, but we're also advancing our plans for guidance and education to support application. We continue to be focused on delivering interoperability with both IFRS that are being finalized on their side, and more broadly with GRI standards to deliver an efficient disclosure system. We continue to articulate, of course, this with connectivity, and I signed together with my colleague Andreas Barkov, the chair of IASB, an article to that effect. So basically setting the scenes and the foundations for ensuring a proper takeoff and launch of S1 and S2, hopefully around the end of this quarter. So that covers some of the key activities currently, but Sue, perhaps you could share your perspective on the supplementary meeting that we had recently.
Sure. So firstly, to set the scene on that, giving everybody an update, we're going through the balloting or approval process for those first two standards at the moment, and the good news is we're still on track to publish those around the end of June. So we had a supplementary meeting because as we got into the drafting of the final documents and were listening to what people were saying about the initial application, we decided that it would probably be a good idea to introduce another relief for those using our standards to enable them to put their initial focus on this new type of reporting on information around climate, because of course we've been told right from the start that people didn't want us to limit ourselves to climate, but climate was the most important reporting from a timeliness perspective. So to facilitate that, we decided that when companies first start to use S1 and S2, they do need to use S1, but that they can limit the sustainability risks and opportunities that they provide disclosure about to climate-related risks and opportunities as set out in S2. So we did that really to make the start a little bit more straightforward for people starting to apply our standards, and because it really enables people to get used to the concepts and the new terminology and ideas in our standards, and in particular because of things like the Scope 3 disclosures in S2, it enables them to really understand and map their value chains, which is really good preparation for their broader sustainability reporting. So they do need to apply S1 right from the start because that's got really important overarching concepts in there, such as the concept of materiality and the idea of connections with the financial statements, but the topics and the disclosures they provide will be focused on climate only in the first year if they choose to limit their reporting that way. They can, of course, do more. So that covers our supplementary meeting, I think, Emmanuel, and brings us to today. So do you want to chat about the discussion we had on our upcoming consultation on our future agenda priorities.
Sure, thank you. So first of all, the one thing I'd say is that this conversation and that discussion today rooted back into the very, very first moment where the ISSB was created as the trustees of the Foundation's consultation that led to the creation of ISSB really brought that feedback that we should start with climate but not be about climate only. And therefore we committed from day one that we would quite soon in our existence consult of what should be next after climate. And so that's really what brought the existence of that process that led today to the decision to launch this consultation. Having said that, this is not for the lack of current work and for probably the next 12 or 18 months, full technical work that needs to be performed around topics that we have identified since already October last year and shared with our stakeholders, and that we identify as foundational work around the applicability of international applicability of SASB standards, connecting with the financial statements and digital taxonomy and further work on climate enhancements. So we do have a lot of work to be done and achieved this year and probably a good part of next year. But as part of that commitment to bring visibility to the market, we're therefore launching an RFI where we're asking for feedback to our audience and to you all that are listening this podcast on our 2-year work plan that would start after that initial foundational work period and support of S1 and S2. So we're consulting on the substance on 4 potential projects: biodiversity, ecosystems in ecosystem services that include water and others, human capital and human rights, and integration in reporting. We really see those as large projects, and therefore it is unlikely that we will have capacity to deliver or even significantly advance all of these projects within the 2 years of work plan that we are consulting about. And therefore we're seeking very important feedback on the relative priority of those projects, which we intend we have intended to present on the basis that they are seen as very important to investors. There are identified deficiencies in current approaches. These themes are prevalent, pervasive, and acute as matters across industries and jurisdictions, and there is complexity, feasibility, and capacity issues to deliver them. We are asking for a comment period open for 120 days starting from next month, and we would encourage our audience to respond through an online survey that would help the consumption of this feedback. So that was really our first session, and really, exciting moment for us to launch the ball to the market now and get that feedback so that we have some visibility ourselves and bring that visibility to our midterm plan of works. That was the first session, Sue, and maybe what were your takeaway from our second session today?
Sure. So the second thing we talked about at the meeting was our project on improving the international applicability of the SASB standards, which I talked about in some detail in March, so I won't get into all that detail again here. But we agreed today to ratify the exposure draft that was prepared by our SASB Standards board advisors, and we agreed that there'll be a 90-day consultation period, so we'll publish this also in May around the same time as our request for information that Emmanuel was just talking about. So this is a really targeted project to update references in the SASB standards to improve the international applicability. It's not a big project to sort of update or make more fundamental adjustments to the SASB standards, although we do ask a question in the exposure draft while we have everybody's attention. So if you do have thoughts on what we should think about in the future on the SASB standards, we are interested in that feedback as well. But this is really focusing on a small subset of the metrics in the SASB standards. Around 20% of the metrics in the SASB standards would be covered by these proposed updates that would incorporate references so that they're more internationally applicable when they currently are fairly jurisdictional specific. And we're asking about the methodology that we should use. So it's a different type of exposure draft that's designed to really focus people's attention on a very key aspect of the SASB standards. And so that was the board meeting, Emmanuel, pretty targeted at this time because we're so busy getting through the documentation of S1 and S2. But maybe you'd like to give our listeners an update on what else we've been up to while we've been here in Frankfurt.
Yeah, with pleasure indeed. And it's been a very productive week for us here all. First of all, I'd like to signal that we held our inaugural meeting of the Sustainability Standards Advisory Forum in presence and hybrid with engagement with our colleagues from about 15 jurisdictions and regional bodies around the world. The purpose of the Sustainability Standards Advisory Forum is to receive their technical insights on our forward-looking working plan. I'd like really to thank each and every member for their time, and we certainly look forward to our ongoing engagement. We also had yesterday morning a jurisdictional working group meeting. That jurisdictional working group is an instance that we created exactly a year ago, actually, with a much more limited number of jurisdictions that continue to engage on strategic matters relating to their current active work on adopting standards, including the International Sustainability Standards and or their interoperability therewith. We also had a meeting with our Frankfurt Consortium, and we, with pleasure, met with business leaders from our Frankfurt Consortium and some also of our public sector audience and leaders here, which is basically the group that has helped us more than a year ago now establish our head office here in Frankfurt and the seat of the chair of the ISSB here. Finally, let me just signal that yesterday the G7 climate, energy and environment ministers expressed support for the ISSB work in a communique that was published from their meeting this week in Japan, and that basically follows up on our own visit to the Prime Minister and a number of other key policy stakeholders and financial regulators in Japan early March, so a couple of months ago. So with that, I'd like to wrap up this podcast. That's been a very active week. Next month, we will be meeting in London for the first time. And actually, we'll also engage with our sister board, IASB, at that occasion. And we look forward to updating you all on the outcomes of that meeting following that. Thank you very much for your attention. Stay well.
For the latest developments from either the International Sustainability Standards Board or the International Accounting Standards Board, make sure to subscribe on the IFRS Foundation website, www.ifrs.org. If you enjoyed this podcast, please take some time to rate, review, and subscribe on your preferred podcast player.